Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Christabelle Spiritualist Church for our Sunday virtual sermon. And today we do have a special Christmas sermon for you today. So without further ado, allow me to begin with our invocation, followed by our reading of the 9 principles, and then we will get right into my sermon. I hope you enjoy this one. It's kind of a fun one, at least I think so. O great infinite Spirit, as we are come together in like mind, may the glow of spiritual understanding warm our hearts and minds with spiritual love. May we rejoice in the spirit and gladness of this Christmas season. May the ceaseless spirit of peace and goodwill on earth reign in the hearts of all. During this season, may we be more aware of the Christmas spirit, bringing peace, harmony, love, and joy. May this Christmas season be a reminder to love one another in peace and harmony. Amen. And now, on to our reading of the Declaration of Principles. I actually really enjoy reading these because I do my best to live them every day, and hopefully so do you. We believe in infinite intelligence. We believe that the phenomena of nature, both physical and spiritual, are the expression of infinite intelligence. We affirm that a correct understanding of such expression and living in accordance therewith constitute true religion. We affirm that the existence and personal identity of the individual continue after the change called death. We affirm that communication with the so-called dead is a fact scientifically proven by the phenomena of spiritualism. Sorry, I'm a little tired this morning. We believe that the highest morality is contained in the golden rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. We affirm the moral responsibility of individuals and that we make our own happiness or unhappiness as we obey or disobey nature's physical and spiritual laws. We affirm that the doorway to reformation is never closed against any soul here or hereafter. We affirm that the precepts of prophecy and healing are divine attributes proven through mediumship. Marley was dead to begin with. There is no doubt whatever about that. How many of you out there are familiar with that famous first line? I'm sure that even if you have not read A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens, that you've probably seen some iteration of it over the years, right? I mean, most of us have. If, for some reason, that you've managed to avoid A Christmas Carol before now, I highly recommend either reading it or listening to it on whatever audiobook format that you favor, or finding a version that strikes your fancy and watching it on television. You know, it's bound to be on somewhere this time of year, multiple places. Now, personally, I happen to like Bill Murray's ridiculous take on things in the movie Scrooged. Or for a slightly more traditional take on things, I actually think my favorite version of A Christmas Carol happens to be The Muppet Christmas Carol. I know, I'm just a big kid, but believe it or not, even though it has the Muppets, that version of the tale really does do a great job of telling the story in a manner that's actually quite true and quite faithful to the source material. But then also you have Paul Williams' amazing score to that particular movie too, so you have that going for you. Now then, anyway, for anyone unfamiliar with this particular Christmas parable, I shall provide you with the Cliff's Notes version. Marley was dead to begin with. So, okay, our main character, Ebenezer Scrooge, his business partner, Jacob Marley, happened to have died 7 years before we begin our story. Scrooge and Marley ran a counting house. house. Now, for those of you who are unaware, think of a counting house as being a cross between an accounting office and a credit union, with a little bit of banking thrown in. After Marley died, Scrooge continued on, loving money and being filled with contempt for his fellow humanity. Scrooge would say anything that he didn't necessarily approve of was a humbug. Oh, but he was a tight-fisted, hand-at-the-grindstone Scrooge, a squeezing, wrenching, grasping, scraping, clutching, covetous old sinner. Hard and sharp as flint, from which no steel had ever struck out generous fire, secret and self-contained and solitary as an oyster. The cold within him froze his old features, nipped his pointed nose, shriveled his cheek, stiffened his gait, made his eyes red, his thin lips blue, and spoke out shrewdly in a grating voice. A frosty rime was on his head, on his eyebrows, and on his wiry chin. He carried his own low temperature always about with him. He iced his office in the dog days and didn't thaw 1 degree at Christmas. I love that passage. I apologize, that was a long quote, but it really does a great job of giving you an idea of exactly the type of character and personality that Dickens was writing about. So we move forward in our story here to Scrooge is coming home one cold winter night right before Christmas, and he finds that his old business partner, the late Jacob Marley, was waiting for him in his bedchambers. Oh yeah, did I mention that Marley was dead to begin with? Scrooge was beginning to have doubts about that. Now, Marley was wrapped up in this long chain that was just filled with cash boxes and just this big heavy iron chain that, Marley had to keep readjusting this chain on himself in order that he could carry the weight of his burden more comfortably. And Marley warned Scrooge that the chains that he had worn, that he was being worn, were forged by his greed and lack of compassion in life, and that the chain that Scrooge forged is now 7 years longer and more heavy, and that if Scrooge doesn't change his ways, he's going to be in for even more torment and suffering than what Marley was enduring. Now, Marley comes to give Scrooge a heads up that he is going to be visited by 3 spirits. And Scrooge is a little incredulous of this, but he does get a little unnerved, and he actually tries to get Marley to speak comfort to him. And he compliments Marley on how great he was at running the business. How could he have all these chains and all these cash boxes weighing him down when he was just so great at running the business? "Business," cried the ghost, wringing his hands again. "Mankind was my business. The common welfare was my business. Charity, mercy, forbearance, and benevolence were all my business. The dealings of my trade were but a drop of water in the comprehensive ocean of my business." So after Marley leaves Scrooge to his cold, empty thoughts, Scrooge tries to convince himself that it was all just a bad dream, and that it was nothing to worry about, until we skip ahead a few pages to the Ghost of Christmas Past. It is this spirit that shows Scrooge how the choices he made in his past were so based often on fear and on a desire to put his own needs ahead of those of another. Scrooge is not happy about this, obviously. I mean, nobody wants to necessarily be reminded of their own inappropriate choices, after all. So the Ghost of Christmas Past, after showing Scrooge his inappropriate choices and how they've rippled out to other people, really gives Ebenezer a lot to ponder about the direction that he took his life in. And he's also starting to kind of understand that his choices really did affect those people around him. Which leads us to the Ghost of Christmas Present, a rather large and boisterous spirit. The Ghost of Christmas Present is so filled with the joy of the holiday season that he's actually a bit absent-minded. It is this spirit that takes Scrooge on a tour around London on Christmas Day, so that Scrooge can see how others around not only celebrate Christmas, but how they've been affected by Scrooge's lack of compassion and generosity. Specifically, Scrooge sees how his poor clerk, Mr. Bob Cratchit, and his family are eking out a very meager existence based on the pittance that Scrooge pays him. And Scrooge is a little bit touched because when Cratchit's wife actually speaks ill of Scrooge, Mr. Bob Cratchit actually stands up for Scrooge. And so this kind of touches Scrooge a little bit. And I think it is also an excellent example of how Mr. Bob Cratchit is a perfect example of a person who lives life with an attitude of gratitude. Anybody out there remember our Let's Talk Turkey sermon? I knew you would. At this point, it's where Scrooge becomes aware of Bob Cratchit's young son, whom they call Tiny Tim. Tim, who is very ill, he walks with a crutch. He becomes concerned about Tim's future, at which point Scrooge actually asks the spirit what will happen to Tim. The spirit tells Scrooge that even though he is not the ghost of Christmas future, unless the shadows of the future are changed, he sees a crutch without an owner. And this really does affect Scrooge in that he just doesn't want to see anything happen to the child. Scrooge is still reeling from this revelation by the ghost of Christmas present when, a few pages later, he's visited by the ghost of Christmas future. Now, this is the spirit that Scrooge has been the most concerned about. It is this spirit that shows Scrooge how after he physically dies, he is not going to be missed, and that some people actively benefit from his passing. He is also shown by the Spirit the fate of his clerk and family. How, life has lost all joy and all meaning for the poor Cratchit family after the death of Tiny Tim. This is the event, more than any other, that really does kind of shake Scrooge strongly enough to the point where he's begging the Spirit to take him home because he's learned his lesson. And Scrooge miraculously finds himself in his bedchambers on Christmas morning. The spirits had returned him just in time for Christmas. At this point, we get the happy ending that to our story where Scrooge has learned his lesson, gives his clerk a raise, and in general becomes the happy, generous person who keeps Christmas in his heart year-round. As Tiny Tim says at the end of the story, God bless us, everyone. Aww. I do like that. I do. I'm making fun of it a little bit, but I really do enjoy that story. It's a lovely story after all, right? So what does any of this have to do with spiritualism? I mean, after all, I am up here on the platform of Spiritualist Church. It's coming up on Christmas. And I'm talking with all of you about it, so there must be some sort of a connection, right? Of course there is. I think you'll find that even though Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol was published in 1843, or about 5 years before the events of Hydesville, New York, and a full 50 years before the founding of what would become the National Spiritualist Association of Churches, there contains an amazing amount of spiritualist truth in this wonderfully uplifting story. It really does. I mean, first off, let's start with the continuity of life, shall we? We affirm that the existence and personal identity of the individual continue after the change called death. So first, we have the spirit of Jacob Marley, who was, quote, dead to begin with, showing up in Ebenezer Scrooge's bedchamber in order to prophesy. I mean, really, isn't that what he's doing by foretelling the coming of 3 other spirits? He's prophesying. Prophecy and healing are indeed the goals of Marley's visit, both of which actually are considered to be divine attributes proven by mediumship. So prophecy in the sense that he's letting Scrooge know what is to come, and healing in the form of looking to help Scrooge change the direction of his life to a more positive one, to help Scrooge to heal, to help him to be a better, stronger, happier person, to help him seek out more of a life seeking to be of service to others rather than one putting others into service to him. Even though, as spiritualists, we do understand that Jacob Marley would not necessarily have been tormented in spirit for his inappropriate actions in life, I kind of have always wondered if he was punishing himself. Because as we spiritualists understand, there is no judgment faced when we shuffle off this mortal coil and make our transition. Except, of course, any judgment that we choose to place on ourselves. So, as I said, we do have Jacob Marley coming in spirit to visit Scrooge to give him a heads up that he's about to be visited by other spirits who are going to try and help guide him. Wait, what's that? Scrooge has spirit guides? Higher guidance that is there to help him be that better, stronger, happier person? That higher guidance? Yep. You know what? That sounds pretty spiritualist to me. What about you? Now also, think back to how the ghost of Christmas past showed Scrooge that his words, thoughts, and actions were largely based in fear and selfishness. That sounds pretty familiar as well, doesn't it? Scrooge starts to see that the decisions he made in the past have rippled out into the universe and affected the people that he knew around him in less than positive ways. What's that? Wait, did I just hear someone out there in the virtual congregation land shout out about this being an example of natural law? Was that you, Rebecca? Hooray! Yes, that's right. It is the law of cause and effect. Scrooge is figuring out that his actions have consequences as well. Another of nature's laws in action. I know, I just talked about that, but it's always good to have a refresher. There's also an example of our spiritualist principle number 7. We make our own happiness or unhappiness. Scrooge learns that his past decisions have greatly affected how he got to where he is in life. Which really leads us to exactly where he is in life, right now. The ghost of Christmas present comes along to show Scrooge the world around him that he has chosen to ignore up until now. At this point, he starts to become a bit more aware of the golden rule. Up until now, he's closed himself off to being loving and indeed being loved. His anger, his frustration, his greed, his fear, it's all convinced him that he just wants to be left alone. However, after seeing the joy that comes from the people around him, even those who are struggling just to put a roof over their heads and food on the table, much less have any sort of lavish Christmas feast, Scrooge is a bit taken aback by that. I mean, how can these people be treating each other so well when they themselves are not doing well? Why would they bother to help each other if they don't have to? Why would they share with each other? Why would they be kind to each other if they don't have to? I mean, these are all things that Scrooge ponders as the Spirit shows him Bob Cratchit's house and Tiny Tim. You remember the Cratchit family? I knew you would. So, in watching the Cratchits, Scrooge starts to feel something he has not really felt in many years, if ever. What could that be? Compassion. He feels himself beginning to wonder how he can help the Cratchit family, and Tiny Tim in particular. After being told by the Spirit that it doesn't appear that Tiny Tim will survive until next Christmas, Scrooge decides that he must do something to help. Okay, so, where were we again? Oh, yeah. The ghost of Christmas future. The name of this spirit also, just the name alone speaks to prophecy, doesn't it? There really is a lot of prophesying in this story. This is the spirit that Scrooge was most concerned about. He really doesn't want to see where his life is going and where it's going to lead if he doesn't change his ways. After he sees just what the future could bring, I mean, after all, we do have the free will to change our path, right? Remember last week's sermon, free will? I knew you would. Scrooge realizes that the Spirit would not be showing him all these disturbing events yet to come if there was no way to change them. At the end, Scrooge is returned to his bedchamber to find that it is Christmas morning and he's a changed man. He vows to keep Christmas in his heart all year round. No more humbugs, just lots of hugs and joy as Scrooge has learned his lesson. Mankind was his business. The common welfare was his business. Charity, mercy, forbearance, and benevolence were all his business. Life became so much more than just the acquisition of wealth. Do you remember our How Do You Measure Success sermon? I knew you would. And really, isn't life about more than just he who dies with the most toys wins? Isn't it really more than just the acquisition of wealth? It's more than just the presents under the tree. 'Tis the season to be reminded that Christmas is all about joy, peace, kindness, happiness, and love. Love your fellow humanity. It is also an excellent reminder this time of year that we are not alone. Not only do we have all the wonderful people around us who care about us, but we have those loved ones in spirit, our own higher guidance, all the way up through to infinite intelligence, that beautiful, loving, infinite mind that loves us and is there for us and has set all things in motion so that we can be here having this human experience. We have that wonderful higher guidance. We have that love, that joy. And please, go forth, not only during this Christmas season, but go forth this entire year ahead. Take that joy of the Christmas season with you year round. And again, on behalf of those of us here at the Christabelle Spiritualist Church here in beautiful Cherry Valley, Illinois, it is my great honor to wish you all a wonderful and a happy Merry Christmas. Thank you.